Today we're going to talk about a binary and set of words that many of us use without a second thought, which is first world and third world. If you have ever described bumpy roads or slow internet as a third world problem, or if you have ever felt relieved to live in a first world country like New Zealand, you are not alone. These phrases are common in new headlines in everyday conversation, and sometimes even in the way governments talk about aid and development. But these labels are rarely neutral. They are not simply factual descriptions of how rich or stable a country is. Instead, they often carry a heavy load of history, hidden assumptions, and a real-world consequence. They can shape how we see other nations, how we see ourselves, and even how we respond to inequality both globally and right here in Aotearoa. Over the next few minutes, we will break this binary down. We will ask, where did the terms first world and third world actually come from? Why can they be misleading? How might they affect New Zealand directly? And most importantly, what can we talk about it? Let's begin with the history.
The terms First World and Third World first emerged in the 1950s during the Cold War as part of the Three Worlds concept. This concept was used to categorize nations based on their political alignment. The First World included capitalist nations such as the United States and NATO member states. Members of the Warsaw Pact and communist nations such as the Soviet Union, China, and North Korea became known as the Second World. Any remaining nations that were non-aligned were labeled Third World. Many of the nations that fell into the category of Third World were either present or former colonies, and as a result, were often less wealthy and industrialized. Consequently, the term Third World became associated with underdevelopment and poverty, and First World then became used to describe higher-income industrialized nations, and thus our contemporary definitions of First World and Third World emerged.
Now that we know where the binary came from, let's look at why it falls as a description of the real world. The core problem is that wealth and poverty do not respect national borders, even within countries that are typically labeled first world. There can be deep factors of poverty, inequality, and deprivation. The United States is arguably one of the most powerful first world countries on earth, yet the child poverty rate in the US is around 17%, being the third highest among OECD countries. Meanwhile, China has the world's second largest economy by nominal GDP, yet they face significant urban and rural divide, where urban outcomes are currently about 2.31 times higher than rural outcomes. According to Gini, China's measure of income equality, they remain above the international warning level of 0.4. The binary was not designed to describe economic complexities like this. It was designed to describe political allegiance during a specific period of history. Even more importantly, the binary can hide history. The first and third world binary often overlooks the violent history of colonialism, slavery, and exploitation that contributed to today's global inequality. Much of the wealth of high-income countries was built on colonial extraction. For instance, a 2025 Oxfam report revealed that between 1765 and the 1900, approximately 64.82 trillion was drained from India to Britain, significantly impacting both economies, with much of this wealth benefiting the richest 10%. Labeling a country as third world ignores that its poverty may result from centuries of resources extraction, forced labor, and unfair trade rules imposed by first world countries. New Zealand is not exempt from this history. Our dairy industry, a key economic sector, was largely developed on taken land from Māori through colonial wars, confiscations, and the Native Land Court. Even some agricultural exports depend on cheap labor from Pacific nations, often labeled Third World. This binary can obscure such histories, allowing New Zealanders and citizens of other wealthy countries to feel proud of being First World, without questioning the cost to others.
In recent years, the usage of the terms First World and Third World has become increasingly controversial due to its potential harm and inaccuracy. Firstly, the term Third World suggests that these nations are irrelevant and insignificant, placing their populations and interests at the peripheries of global conversations. It establishes a global hierarchy based on development, in which First World countries are considered more powerful and important than those of the Third World. Secondly, it propagates the inaccurate association of wealth with development. The idea that wealthier, more industrialized First World nations are more developed than Third World nations overlooks the complex nature of the concept of development. It disregards the role of social and political factors such as access to healthcare and education and political freedom as signifiers of development. Moreover, the First World versus Third World binary creates strict and separated categories, ignoring the historical interconnection between these two worlds. It fails to recognize the role of First World nations and much of the Third World's current economic underdevelopment. Many of these First World nations colonized Third World nations, a factor that contributed significantly to their economic prosperity. Slavery, natural resource exploitation, and access to cheap labour propelled the wealth of first world nations at the cost of the native population.
New Zealand is often seen as a wealthy, developed first world country with a high standard of living. However, the first world and third world divide still has important effects within the country. One major issue is inequality. Even though New Zealand is economically successful, Māori and Pacifica communities are more likely to experience poverty, overcrowded housing, unemployment, and poorer health and education outcomes. Māori are also significantly overrepresented in the prison system, showing that wealth is not shared equally across the population. Another issue is labor exploitation. New Zealand relies heavily on workers from poor Pacific nations, especially from schemes like the Recognised Seasonal Employer Program. These workers are essential in industries like agriculture and horticulture, but often receive lower pay and face difficult working conditions. Finally, the impact of colonization on Māori is still visible today. Land loss and the introduction of Western economic systems disrupted Māori society, and many inequalities today, such as lower income and life expectancy, are linked to this history.
We have seen how broken and harmful this whole first world, third world label really is. The question now is, how do we fix it? It comes down to two simple things, which is changing the words we use and backing that up with action. First, we need to stop using first world and third world in our daily lives. When you hear them, just pause and think about what those words are hiding. Instead of using lazy labels, we should just talk about the actual issues like wealth gaps or lack of resources. But changing words isn't enough if we don't do anything. Here in New Zealand, we can start by standing up for the people our system takes advantage of. We can support local groups and sign petitions to get a fairer deal for Pacific seasonal workers demanding better housing, fair pay, and a real path to permanent residency. At the end of the day, the real issue isn't a divide between different countries, it's about fairness and how we treat people.
The first world, third world binary is not a neutral description of reality. It can obscure the coexistence of wealth and poverty within countries, erase history by ignoring colonialism, slavery, and blind us to our own inequalities, justify migrant worker exploitation, and dehumanize those labeled as third world, making it easier to ignore the suffering. However, binaries can be broken. We are not confined to Cold War language and can choose more accurate, respectful, and honest ways to describe the world, even if no term is perfect. Pay attention to how you use first world and third world. Notice them in the news and your speech. When you hear them, ask, what might this binary be hiding? And what could I say instead? Change often starts with language but doesn't end there. Breaking the binary also involves taking action, signing petitions, supporting migrant workers, and demanding fair policies. The world is not neatly divided into two boxes. It is a messy, unequal, but deeply interconnected single planet. We all share it. Thank you for watching. Break the binary with nuance and care.